I remember when I was very young, there was a book, and it was by a fellow called Michael Walsh, who was a poet, and happened to be, I was told, a cousin or a relation of my grandmother. And he wrote a book called The Heart Remembers Morning. It was a title I liked, that the heart remembered morning, that like morning as being the beginning of your life or whatever, but the sense of memory was something the heart did, not just an intellectual side of yourself, but a real kind of, the loving heart, the compassionate heart was the organ that remembered morning. And I thought that's a beautiful idea. And then on the inside, a woman had written the words, "In memory of days that were and therefore are forever." And this woman put her first name on it, and it was dedicated to Michael, who was my father. At least it was dedicated to Michael, and he had the book on his shelf, so I presume it was somebody that he knew many years ago sent him this book. And sending him this book, they were also kind of reaching out to him with the sense of what memories they must have had. Let's say he got the book when he was in his 40s, maybe even 50s, maybe even he was married, and this old flame sends him a book. In memory of days that were and therefore are forever. An elegant way of sending out love, or sending out a sense that whatever we had together was also very real and is kind of still alive. Same thing happens with me sometimes. If I meet somebody that I was, romantically involved with in a slight way or a big way, and I meet them 2, 3 decades later, 4, 5 decades later, I find it extraordinary how the same intensity and buzz and affection is there. It's like alive still, the relationship. I remember one woman who was once a girlfriend when I was in my 20s, and I hadn't seen her probably for 40 years, and made an arrangement to have coffee with her in a hotel in Dublin. When I walked in the door of the hotel, and from the minute I walked in, from the minute I saw her, I started talking and she started talking, and it was as if we had never been apart. And that was 40 years later. And the kind of energy I got from her, not only was it the same energy as I used to get from her in my 20s, but it was like, it didn't feel like a nostalgia. It didn't feel like I was getting something from the past. It was like, yes, this has always been here. This is the present. This is me and her, and this relationship is still exactly as it was. And that happens with lots of people who are friends or people in the family. The very precise nature of the relationship seems to be exactly the same. You meet them 20 years later. And I suppose what I'm wondering about all the time is, if it all happens at a surface level, but if there's a depth, I talk about things happening in the imaginal realm, in some realm of form that transcends the surface. I feel that if we're living at the surface, we're just at the surface. But if you're living in depth, you're living in the heart. You bring the mind down into the heart, and you open the door and you walk in and you see the other person, and there's a sense of your heart reaching out to them. That you're living at a depth. And does that mean that some part of what existed 40 years ago with me and an old girlfriend, that what existed then has not gone away anywhere? It's still in some way resonating through the universe, resonating in the timeless realm. And is it possible maybe to think about people that we love and who have gone to their rest, as they say? Is it possible to think of them in the same way, that the love that I had for my mother or my father, that is not obliterated by time, and especially not by linear time? That in some sense, the moments of affection and tenderness, maybe between mother and child, that existed between me and my mother, maybe that was so real that it transcended time. The depth of that encounter transcended time, and therefore, if it transcended time, it must still be there. It's only if something were entirely trapped in time that you might say that it's in the past. And maybe that's how we think that love is eternal. That in some sense, when we create love between two people, when two people come together and generate a sense of heartfelt affection and compassion for each other, that they have created something in the universe. Not just like, it's not just a surface experience for them as egotistical little units bobbing along through time, but that in some sense they are the surface manifestation of a depth, and that when they create love, they've created, if you like, a depth of love, a sense of, and this is where you go into the religious language, a sense of God. God is love. So it's like two people loving each other are creating, in the surface level of just encountering each other affectionately, are at a level of a deeper depth, embodying or allowing God's presence to be embodied, to be incarnate. So we all become Christ, present to each other when we love, or the other bits like when we forgive, which is an aspect of love, or when we, have generosity to somebody, when we're patient with somebody, when we're wise and we counsel them, when we share with somebody else at a surface level. It's good, it's okay. It's like two little egos bobbing around and saying, hello, hello, hello. But when you have your heart in it and the other person has their heart in it, and that you're opening to each other like at a depth, like that you almost feel there's something bigger than what's visible going on, that there's something it's almost like you're wrapped up in something bigger that's controlling you. That's what love always feels like. And that maybe it's true. Maybe we are really, in those moments, engaging in this generation, this making of love to happen at the surface level. And because we're connected to a depth which is unfathomable in its mystery, that perhaps we have generated something like nuclear, like astonishing, that we don't even realize. And that maybe when we generate that sense of love, it is always there. It's enriching you from outside time. And you see, that would probably, and I'm only guessing here because I'm not a teacher, I'm not a theologian, I'm not a psychotherapist, I don't know anything, I'm just sharing my story, I'm sharing my life. This has been my experience, that's all. My experience has been that sometimes I generate with somebody a beautiful moment of love or compassion, And when it's happening, it feels like, not just on the surface, but it feels like, God, I'm wrapped up in something hugely big here. It's like a tsunami of love. It's like something engulfing the two of us. And when that happens, maybe it's true. Maybe that at an imaginal level, with the dynamic of me and the other person, we are creating, or maybe not creating, maybe it's more like allowing God to be your embodiment. Now, and that is the kind of stuff that I love, you know. That's why having a relationship with anybody, as far as I'm concerned, is like living at the ocean. It's like living at the edge of the sea. Because when I'm at the edge of the sea in Donegal, there is a sense of infinity when you look out on the ocean. Now, I know that the ocean, 5,000 miles later, meets Newfoundland and New York and everywhere else over there. But it becomes a metaphor because it is so big, you can't see across the horizon, and all you can feel is this immensity, which is like eternity, which is like unlimited. And it has this sense of life in it. You can hear the sea from very far away. The noise the sea is making at the distance is coming towards you as a kind of a hum, and the noise the sea is making close by the shore in the shingle and the flow of the waves. It's all coming in and rinsing your ears, and you're feeling absolutely joyful and gorgeous with that. And you're feeling it's coming from an infinite distance. And it is such a metaphor for me of God's presence, that there's this kind of infinite love in the present moment that's always coming towards you. I love that. I love that experience. It's an amazing experience. And I compare that to a relationship with another human being. I'm not talking about your beloved. I'm not talking about your husband or wife or your children. I'm talking about everybody that you have a relationship with and a friendship with and fun with, and people you haven't seen for 30 years but you were friends with them at school or at college or whatever. All that stuff, other human beings, when you're relating to them, it's like you're standing at the edge of the ocean. They are infinite in their mystery. There's no containing the possibilities of who they are that you don't know about. And yet, you feel like they're embracing you, that you're enveloped in their tenderness and in their love. And that's just, to me, that's where the human interaction corresponds with some kind of divinity. I just can't live life at the surface level. I can't live life like without magical thinking, to be honest, because I feel that magical thinking is in itself a profoundly true use of language. When I talk about that depth, that every experience, every event that happens has a depth to it that's invisible and that never goes away. Well, think about that in terms of karma. In Buddhist terms, that becomes like very, very close to what Buddha philosophy would say. That your actions have consequences. And they continue to have consequences unless you find some kind of antidote that dissolves negative karma. You also benefit endlessly and infinitely from positive karma. There's so many little phrases in Buddhist teachings in Tibet where they will say things like forgiveness or one act of generosity to a poor person is worth, 100 lifetimes. It will eradicate the bad karma of 1,000 lifetimes. One gesture. And the reason is because it's saying that even in one single gesture of forgiveness or one single gesture of compassion to somebody who is in need, one gesture, you are again collaborating with another human being to create a hidden depth, a depth of this presence, this underneath everything imaginal realm that kind of, if you like, erupts through that moment. And that's like a sacrament. I mean, I think that's what the word sacrament probably really means, that things we do physically are actually at the surface level, but they are gathering up a deeper level of the imaginal realm and making it present. So we think of, the divine service in the Orthodox tradition or the Eucharist as being heaven. It's like we're in heaven in this moment as we enact this. It's amazing how the sense of the other person and yourself always creates a dynamic which has a depth to it which is infinite. It's like the ocean. So meeting the other person is like meeting the ocean. And it's one of the fundamental kind of pillars on which I believe and which makes sense to me of memory, because if you think the way I'm thinking, then memory is just simply unlocking those moments. And you can see how, for example, if you unlock disturbing memories, you're releasing a kind of a sense of disturbance that, well, in my experience, can sometimes be unhelpful. And again, I'll give you a very small example. When I was very sick, we'll say 3 or 4 years ago, I had a particular pain in my leg. It was coming from malfunctioning arteries. And it was terribly unpleasant. Well, imagine, let's say last week, I got a pain in the leg in the same place. And the experience of that, like as a memory, it unlocked ferocious disturbance in my psyche for a whole day. It felt as if I was back again in that time when I was ill. And there's another place that happens, and I've had this experience also, and that is with depression. Because when I was feeling depressed in 2011, 2012, 2013, that period, it was awful. Like the inability to get out of bed, the inability to communicate with people, the sense of that you would never be able to do anything again in your life except look out the window at crows sitting on the post in the garden. It was really terrible. But gradually I got out of it, and yet every so often, maybe like 3-4 years later, something might happen and I would get what I called a dip. I would just drop down. My emotions would drop through the floor very suddenly because I was recalling something was triggering me. Might have been the owl crow outside, or it might be a particular light in the sky, particularly in winter. Those 3 or 4 winters then in the 2017, around then, I used to still dread winter. I dreaded winter when it came to September because I could feel the light when it was very weak in the sky all day would trigger in me the memory of when I was really depressed. And I'd be terrified that it would drag me down into it again, because it seemed to me that the experience of that depression, again, in the imaginal realm, it was still there. It was eternally there. And so it feels that everything that I have done in my life, every what they might call karmic actions in Buddhist language. Everything I've done, it seems to me, is like it can never be undone. And that goes for speech too. There's a very, very powerful phrase they use in Islam. You know, they say your words are like the arrows. Once you release them from the bow, you can never take them back. And I do believe that I've had experiences, and we've all had experiences where you say something and you know the minute you've said it, it's like an earthquake. The world is changed. And you will live out the rest of your life within a new context, because that can never be taken back. That's one of the reasons I would always do as much as I can to say as little as possible, especially when you're in an argument. To say as little as possible. No matter how you're raging with the other person, no matter how you just want to fling the most vicious arguments at them and tell them what you think of them, the less you say, the better. Now, that is going against what a lot of people would tell you. And I'm not a teacher and I'm not a therapist. I'm just telling you what my experience is. That the kind of silence, ahimsa in Buddhist terms, seems to have suited me, you know, like, it seems like, well, wow, imagine all the karma that I didn't create because I just kept my mouth shut. But I'm really locking in on the idea of how there is some kind of space which is eternal. And that incarnation, the very core of the Christ idea, is that that was the big plan that God had, that in some way cosmic life is revealing something mystical. That this is not just physical, this is not just matter. It's some kind of enormous mystical presence that is pulsating through time in the revelation of itself. And we are not subjects observing it as object. We are actually it. We are it. We are the universe. I think that's something people keep forgetting. You know, they keep talking about the universe being, you know, a kind of a mystical presence. But we are the universe. There's no war between us and the rest of the cosmos. I love that idea. It comes out hugely in the idea of love itself. You take that beautiful, you know, say my father, and he gets this book and it says, in memory of things that were and therefore are forever. And it's from some particular woman. I won't say her name, but I know who she is. Lives way, way in a different place. Well, she'd be passed away, and by now I'm talking about my father passed away 40 years ago or more. Anyway, I'm just saying that those two people, at some stage, she wrote that on that poetry book and she put it in the post and she sent it to that man. Maybe 1965, let's say. And she was saying that there was a sort of love relationship between them and that love never dies. And I'm saying also that not only when I create something with somebody else, when I create love, when I make love with somebody else, it generates a kind of a reality in the imaginal realm which is there forever. But I'm not just saying it about me, I'm saying it about other people as well. So that is accessible, like my father, her, the love. Maybe just a flirtation, I don't know, but it indicated some sense of affection between them, some sense of love between them. What I'm saying is that is also there. It's like frozen light in the cosmos. It's like good energy has been created. So it has the heat of a fire if I come close to it. And does it bounce off me? Yes, I think it does. And I think that this is hugely connected, for me anyway, with the idea of heaven. That the imaginal realm is what we call heaven. Heaven is not somewhere I'm going to go when I die. I'm not going to die on a Tuesday and wake up Wednesday morning in heaven, in linear time, because heaven refers to something which is outside, which is a dimension beyond this surface reality. And in that sense, it is forever, because it's outside the cage of time, the cage of matter, the cage of space, and the cage of time. The triple lock cage, if you like, in which we live out this life. But live out this life like in a cocoon. And we don't know yet how the transformation happens whereby the caterpillar becomes the butterfly. But we can take it as a model for the possible transformation that happens in our journey into the deepest realm of mystery, where we really completely let go of self, completely renounce, completely experience ahimsa, completely awaken. And that's in death. Because death will take away from us our sense of ego, our sense of self, our body, our physicality. So there's something about death which is like the ultimate place and end of the journey, not as a sort of a dark black hole, but as the opening up of a new possibility. And I think that the renunciation of self, which they talk about in Buddhism, and they talk about in Christianity and in every other religion, but the renunciation, like Ramadan is about renunciation of self, disciplining and using fasting to be able to put a certain little distance between you or me, between me and my appetites, my automatic appetites for food and fun and pleasure. And you awaken in a way that anticipates the ultimate renunciation, which is in death. So the death journey is a positive one. But I think that the imaginal realm that is outside time, that is the space of infinite reality, which is linked by our actions in this life, good or bad, generates an intensity of, if you like, heavenly light that is always available. I was at my mother and father's grave during the week over in Cavan. Be just looking at it to see what needs be done, if you like, after maybe 10 years. There's a little bit of tidying up and brightening up would need to be done on any grave. And I'm standing there, and I know that this is where the remains of those two human beings are lying in repose and, withering into the earth, returning like ash to ash into the earth. I know that, but like Patrick Kavanagh, I do not see either of them in the cold, wet clay of a Monaghan or a Cavan graveyard. I see them in their actions of love, the love that was between them. I remember just once, I was about 18, 19 years of age. I was a student and I came home unexpectedly, and he was in bed. He wasn't well at the time, and she was sitting on the side of the bed. It was about 4:00 in the afternoon, and she's sitting on the side of the bed. He's in the bed, looking out the window at some neighbour coming up the road and wondering whose car is that and who is that. And they're just chatting like that about their neighbours. And even, she was looking out the window, so her back was kind of to him, but her hand was holding his hand. And they were having an ordinary, mediocre chat about the weather and the neighbours. And I just happened to be there unexpectedly. They didn't know I came in the door. I came up the stairs. I looked in the open door of the bedroom. And I saw them, and I got a glimpse of heaven. Because I was getting a glimpse of two people who, in all their fragility, and by God they had fragility, in all their negative energies, and they had negative energies, yet there was a tenderness that each one to the other was opening their heart. And each one had found what I'd say is the ocean. They had found the ocean in the other. I said, you must find in the other person is the ocean. And they had found it. And they were just there with each other, the same way as somebody might be just there with the sea, just standing on the beach looking out at the ocean. And so that's the kind of thing I love about memory, that something is always there, always present. And I'll finally round off this by reading you a memory, or one or two memories. But before I do, I would say that this is one of the great keys or secrets to, I believe, how to write. So you might sometimes think, okay, there's Mickey Harding and he's blathering away about the imaginal realm, the realm of image, the realm of real truth, for which, again, my great and wonderful teacher in Islam, I told you this before, we're looking at the Quran one day. I have a tiny Quran in a beautiful box, and I showed it to him, and I was saying, look, the Quran, and he said, very good, he said, but this is not the Quran. This is a copy of the Quran. The Quran is in heaven. That everything exists in heaven, or will exist, is becoming heaven, in the sense that the love energy, like frozen light, permeates the universe, penetrates everything eventually, like angelic power, like angelic light. And I'll not go into the notion of how that battles with, dark energy or our negative energy or our selfish, and where all that goes. Well, I think it's, in one sense, it's obvious. You can guess it, like that in my religion, whether it be Islam or Buddhism or Christianity, there always has to be a sense of, the light is always battling the darkness. So that at the surface level, every action always has an alternative possibility of doing a negative action. Every time you do something positive, it's like a beautiful reinvention of reality. You're constructing the world out of heaven rather than constructing it out of hell. And you're not putting coals on the fire, as the Buddha would say. You're not building negative energy in the world, knowing that too will resonate eternally as negative energy. You're not doing that. You're doing positive things. You're just wonderfully generating light. That sounds like a really good thing to be doing. And what I'm saying is that, you might think, well, here's me talking like that, obsessed with heaven and obsessed with all this stuff. But I would say that there's nothing helps me write better than that. When I get all that stuff clear in my heart, the kind of, the way that all the years of my life are simply full of moments that live forever, then I'm getting a kind of an overall view, as I get older, it gets clearer, that sense that you're working on the surface, but all the time there's a depth which is forever present. And that's why when you start thinking of icons, you think about icons as a lens through which you are receiving the light of heaven. You're saying that in the act of surrender to God, we say that Mary makes in the coming of Jesus, the nativity, there is something, because of the consequences, because how it turned out with the great story of Jesus becomes the Christ. Because of that, it's like that event is resonating through history and through time eternally. So that if my actions resonate through time, like the light of a little match, or if my father's compassion for some woman, or the woman's compassion for him and the book she sent him, if that is a love moment that was between them and therefore is forever resonating, like maybe, the fire of a stove, then the Christ event, in all the astonishing complexity of the life of Jesus, and the way that he was a Sufi teacher, he was a storyteller, he was able to encapsulate such wisdom that ended up in the four Gospels that have lasted 2,000 years like literature. Even that would make him a complete genius. But imagine all that, and then the compassion, and then the crucifixion. And so you think of all that, and you're talking like something like, in comparison to the little match of energy that I might have, this is like a nuclear explosion, resonating forever through time. Resonating through time, also, I think the only way I can imagine it is the same as light, that there's frozen light in everything, that everything is light. The pulse of every photon, the energy of every electron and neutron, and every little quantum, in reality, ultimately is light. E equals mc squared. Everything transforms into light energy. Everything. So I think of the presence of heaven in the world in the same way. I think of heaven as being this array, this communion of people I know and loved, but all the millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people, and maybe animals as well, maybe all sentient beings, maybe all life, who knows? In some pure land, that's a pure land idea. That's a very Buddhist notion as well. I think it's Amateo, or maybe it's Amataba. I think it's the latter. One of them anyway lives in the pure land of light and is the embodiment of light. This idea that in some way that the earth, in the surface, we get history. Surface level is like time passing. I did this today, I do that tomorrow. But at a deeper level, in the imaginal realm, where everything is beyond time, outside the trap of time, there is the power and love of the Buddha, the power and love of Christ, the power and love of Allah. An infinity of love constantly working its way, seeping like oil into the universe, like oil into a cloth. Is evolution. Seeping in gradually and awakening in consciousness and in love and in compassion, all sentient life. And who knows? It could be a very long journey in the cosmos before we get anywhere. We might be just like at the very start. This extraordinary sense of the mystical Christ present in the whole cosmos. Not as a ghost, not as, a ghost floating round inside time, but matter itself being the manifestation of depth which is beyond time, and that eternal depth being Christ, so that you're looking at the fingerprint of God when you look at the tree, when you look at the leaf, when you look at the sky, you're looking at the fingerprint. It's not that within our context of time there is some kind of spirit floating around. No. This is an idea of the universe that stands up to Dawkins or any other atheist or person who says the entire thing is about science. Fine, accept it. I'm there with that. But there is another conversation to be had about what is outside that. It's metaphysical. It's metaphysical. It can't even be talked about in terms of anything. And the best on that are the Tibetan Buddhists. And I wouldn't be smart enough to convey the stuff that they talk about, like about what is outside the cosmos. And how we can never get there thinking about it, because it's only non-conceptual realizations bring you close to God. Non-conceptual realizations. The minute you have a conceptual realization or a conceptual notion of God as an object, forget it. Forget it. It's not that. And of course, that's what people like Dawkins are always saying. They're always saying, like, well, of course, a conceptual God is ridiculous. And what Dawkins misses is that, yes, Buddhists and Christians agree with that. Nobody ever meant God to be some white-haired ghost floating around in the sky. Anyway, I wanted to finish off with a memory, because the sense of heaven, what I'm saying is, that's what motivates me when I'm writing a column in the newspaper, when I'm writing a book. I'm picking over memories, and I get a sense of reverence for them, because I feel that they have a depth to them that remains eternal, that is there forever. And for the people who live, I get the sense that every single one of them are in some sense eternally belonging to that imaginal realm, that heaven that is the depth in everything. And so in that sense, they're still with us, and in that sense, we're talking like a whole community, not just of the living here at the surface level, but everybody who has ever lived in one community or communion with the Godhead. We ain't going away anywhere. We're being drawn into the depths of that realm of being, which is eternal. And that is what helps me be a writer. So I could actually think like that, use my faith, if you like, simply because it allows me to write in a way that's reverential to the smallest little thing that happened and which I remember. I go through my memory and I pick out things that happened many years ago, but I pick them out like sacred vessels that carried the Godhead in them, and that carried the Godhead in them still. So that when I remember somebody that I loved dearly, an uncle, a relation, a friend, and remember that there was a moment at the surface level of life where I was engaged with them in a loving way, in a compassionate way, and that generated a reality that is at an imaginal level, that is like heaven was on earth, when I was looking at somebody with compassion or with love. In every one of those moments, heaven is on earth. The real exciting thing is to think that heaven is eternal. Its root was outside time, therefore it is not destroyed by time. Death, there is no sting. Death, there is no sting. And that allows me to pick over memories of the past with a fierce joy. I'm sharing that with you because I think it's a lovely thing to do. You don't have to be a writer in the way that I am, earning your money on it, earning a living on it. But it's such a joyful thing to go over memories and remember them like that they are a lens through which heaven is still coming to you. Like beautiful moments with your siblings or with your parents, or with some other person that was kind to you along the road. And you remember the engagement, you remember the moment. It was at a surface level within time, but its presence is still there in the invisible world. It's still resonating down through history and affecting you. So I'm remembering now at the minute something that happened maybe 15 years ago. Bringing horses to Longford Agricultural Show is no joke. Eve, who is only 7, was bringing Bella, her baby pony. Her dad did the driving. Laura, her friend, was up at 6 on Saturday morning to make Bella all pretty, grooming and plaiting the horse's mane. It was going to be Eve's first big show. She was competing in the leading rein class for ponies, to be ridden by children under 8. I was hoping to meet her. I knew she would love the Alice in Wonderland magic of an agricultural show. There was a fortune teller in a camper van. Her poster asserted that she was the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter of a true Roma gypsy. Outside her caravan there happened to be a true Roma woman in a long white dress selling Spider-Man balloons. In the prize winner's tent there were tables of giant vegetables. The winning cabbage was the size of a small shrub. There were tea cosies, cushions, eiderdowns, and porter cakes, jewellery and lace, buns and jams, pots of honey, huge onions, and enormous sticks of rhubarb. There were butter beans that reminded me of the first summer of my daughter's life, when I went mad in the garden. Outside the tent, 6 civil defence volunteers squashed into the rear of their own ambulance. I chatted to a beekeeper. His bees were buzzing in a honeycomb encased in glass. The queen had a white streak of Tipex on her back. She can lay 3,000 eggs a day, he said. It's pure magic. I'm 40 years keeping them. I go down to the garden 12 times a day just to make sure they're all right. At another stall, a man was selling fudge. The banner above him proclaimed, Man of Arran. I asked him why he called his business Man of Arran. He said he was from Inisheer originally. What brought you to the Midlands, I wondered. An old white van, he said. I said, I'll take some fudge for the wife. He said, you're the 5th person today who bought that woman something. She'll be sick of fudge. All across the field there were stalls decked with balloons, and horses of every colour and size, and pedigree dogs swanking about like Hollywood celebrities. There were purple hens and white cocks in a cage, and candy floss, and an ice cream van, and a tent offering pints of Guinness. There was a stall selling coffins for pets, miniature caskets with satin interiors and small pillows on which lay plastic roses. But nowhere could I find Eve or her pony. There were girls in miniskirts and pink wellies, and ladies in jodhpurs and riding boots, sitting up on frisky horses with brushed tails and shimmering haunches. The smell of burgers sizzling in the mobile chipper attracted hungry farmers. My anxiety about my overdraft and the cash I needed to get through August gradually faded away as I stepped back into medieval Ireland, a field of beasts, a man wiping a cow's rear end, a boy washing a bull's flank, a woman combing a calf's tail. Jeeps rumbled quietly over the lumpy grass, while the clouds above threatened to explode. Two Romanian girls, in purple and pink dresses down to their ankles, played with an infant, and gold dangled from their earlobes. One of them had enough gold in her mouth to buy a farm of land. There were limousine cows with fur, the colour of a Donegal beach on a wet day, and teddy bear eyes. A black Aberdeen Angus, tethered to the side of a cattle box, bellowed in anguish. A little girl ran across the field and someone cried, "Don't run, you'll frighten the horses." But it wasn't Eve. A boy with blonde hair, wearing a white shopcoat, was tipping the hind legs of a bull in the ring with a long stick. He placed the stick into the crevice in the hind hoof, and the bull stretched his leg backwards in an exquisite pose. The judge admired the flanks. I felt the ghost of Liam O'Flaherty at my shoulder, a writer whose short stories long ago revealed to me that human beings are enthralled by other animals. A writer so diligently observant that even in hospital before he died, he gazed at a young doctor and said, "You have beautiful eyes." But still no sign of Eve. I phoned her friend. She said that they had arrived too late for the leading rain class competitions, so they turned around and drove back to Mullingar. Eve was disappointed. "All that trouble for nothing," she whispered wistfully, as they drove home. But her friend said that it wasn't the end. There would be lots of other shows. In fact, the summer was only beginning. And that was 14 years ago, so Eve would probably now be in her mid-20s. And I hope that she has had many, many other shows, and that she's had a great life in those 9 years. I don't know, never met her again, but I still can remember the day walking around that agricultural show in Longford and feeling all the detail of all those human beings interacting with each other and in a way loving each other and loving the animals. And what I believe they were generating at that moment was the imaginal realm incarnated in this material cosmos. They were realizing heaven coming to the surface in their heart's compassion for each other and for their animals. And I believe that that aspect of what happened in that day is eternal, is forever present. And I step into it again when I remember it. And I feel a good energy coming to me from it. And I say with my father, and all the other angels and saints in heaven, in memory of days that were, and therefore are, forever. Thank you for being here, as always. I look forward to March, beginning next week, and more stories, more memories, more faith. Thank you. Bye-bye.